Hey, this is John Swana, and you're listening to Detroit JazzStage.
Hello, and welcome to Detroit JazzStage, your monthly one-hour podcast spotlighting Detroit's jazz scene. I'm Rodney Reeves.
And I'm Jim Gallert. Joining us this month on Detroit JazzStage is veteran pianist, composer Buddy Budson. His recent CD, On With Their Heads, features his compositions performed by a sextet. Joining Buddy in the rhythm section are bassist Marion Hayden and drummer Danny Spencer. Trumpeter Dwight Adams, tenor and soprano saxophonist Chris Kaercher, and valve trombonist Al Duncan round out the group. Well, Buddy, there have been so many incredible pianists who come out of Detroit, and I was wondering how you got started.
I got interested at a very early age in music, and playing the piano. And I think when I was I started playing when I was 6. And what happened? We lived in in Detroit, in a four-family flat, and some lady was moving and was giving us her piano, and it was one of those horribly heavy, big old Grinnell upright pianos. And we could have it just for moving it. So it was one of those things where they had to, I don't know, it seemed like I remember this as a little kid. They put it on some kind of crane because we were in an upper flat, and they had to move it in through some kind of upper door. I mean, it couldn't have been a window, I don't think. But I think it was through some kind of upper door.
Oh, through the balcony?
It seemed like it was on the side of the house is what I remember. I don't know. But, it had to be a little porch there. Yeah, you're right. There had to be something. So anyway, I got interested in early age.
But you were working in bars, so when you were underage. I mean, is that right? 15 years old?
Oh, yeah. I think everybody did. I can't imagine any musician that's come up, that hasn't worked in bars when they were younger.
What was that like for you? I mean, being 15 years old, and I mean, were you comfortable being around older people? And did your parents know?
Yeah, they knew. They didn't. My parents. It's funny. My parents were kind of very. It seems what I remember, just kind of apathetic about it. It's like, I'm going to play so-and-so, and one of the guys in the band, they were always older than me, and they, they had cars and stuff, and so-and-so was coming to pick me up, and said, oh, okay. So,
What size bands were these?
They were, I think they were usually trios.
Trios?
And then I guess later on there were singers involved, but they were usually trios, piano, bass, and drums.
What material?
I'm sorry?
Your material that you were playing?
I was playing standards,
really?
Although I was playing in some rock and roll bands, too. Mm-hmm. Actually, I'll tell you the truth, I think I played in the rock and roll bands first.
Were you drawn to, when did you go through distinct phases? Like first you played with the rock and roll bands, and then you heard jazz or something, and you just immediately
No,
I
always liked jazz from the time I was young when I was studying piano, because the piano teacher I had, who was like a third or fourth cousin of mine, who was a well-known concert pianist around Detroit, she was a huge fan, and I think she actually knew Errol Garner, and so he was sort of like my first piano idol, because he was the first guy I listened to a lot, and I was just really taken with the music from the time I started hearing it. And that was another thing that piqued my interest in jazz, because the jazz band director at the high school I went to was really into stuff, and he played around town in a jazz band. so we had a nice little jazz group from school, and we would go and play all over. And his son actually was he was a really good and fairly well-known trumpet player around Detroit who moved out to California. He still lives out there. So I was always interested, and then I had, in those days, there was jazz on the radio, believe it or not, really on the radio.
What year did you graduate high school?
62.
Okay, so we're talking about the late 50s or very early 1960s when John Miles Davis and John Coltrane and even Ornette Coleman and Ellington and Basie were still very prominent and strong. So you had a huge wealth of of contemporary music. What was the first jazz you heard? I mean,
live, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, do you remember the minor key?
Well, I know of it, yeah.
Oh, okay.
On Dexter, sure.
Yeah, well, the minor key, I mean, and I'd never realized this till fairly recently. Mm-hmm. I thought that had been around a long time. It was only in existence 2 years.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was a coffee house. It wasn't, I was going there when I was 15, but it was a coffee house. They didn't serve drinks, so there were a lot of young people going there. And I heard at that club, in those 2 years, I heard Miles Davis with John Coltrane, together, that famous group. I heard, I couldn't even name everybody I heard. I think I heard Horace Silver, Art Blakey, Basie's big band, Ellington's big band, Maynard Ferguson's big band, Cal Tjader's group. You could almost name them, because I would go there just about every week, And they had this little rickety balcony that was a two top tables would just barely fit on you. Could squeeze your way, and there was actually a sign at the bottom of the stairway that said, "Enter balcony at your own risk."
What on this CD that you've recently recorded, which has the interesting title of "On with Their Heads," and then the front cover is very interesting too. And if people, is there a picture of it on your website by any chance?
Yes, there is.
And that's Ursula
and Buddy.com.
And that's URSULAAND, 2 A's?
2 A's in a row.
2 A's,
right,
okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
UrsulaandBuddy.com.
Right.
Buddy, it's great that you're able to drop by our table here at Detroit JazzStage and share some of these wonderful memories you have of growing up in Detroit and all the wonderful music. And there's some wonderful music on your CD. You've got some great players on there to start off with. I mean, you've got Danny Spencer on drums. Maybe you could you tell us a little something about Danny? I mean, here's a guy that's worked with Don Byas, with Ben Webster. I mean, he's played around with guys in Europe. I mean, he's one of the most fiery drummers that I've heard in the city. Who now lives in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Could you tell us how did you meet him?
Well, he's one of my all-time favorite people, and players and drummers and people. He played a long time with Joe Henderson. Of course, maybe as far as name players, more with him than just about anybody. But he's one of those rare musicians that has the ability to inspire you to play when he's playing with him. I know Larry Nazzaro, the late great alto player from Detroit. He said Danny always made him play. I mean, he was so much about the music that he would just lift you to, push you to do stuff. And of course, he was quite the character. Anybody that knew him, I mean, everybody's got tons of Danny Spencer stories. His playing is kind of like his part. Well, you can't separate your personality from your playing, I guess. People have said, and I believe that too.
So the other people in the band, you also have Marion Hayden, the bassist.
Yeah, Marion's another one of my favorites. She's in fact, the whole band, I have to tell you, the actual configuration of the whole group was Marion's band. I did a couple of projects with her that she wrote music for a couple of suites that we performed at several venues. She did some grant projects over a period of a couple of years. And she put together a group of a sextet of 3 horns, and 3 rhythm. And we had done so much stuff together with her that when I had, the idea to do this sextet CD myself, I thought, I'm going to just use this same band intact. And that's exactly what the band is. And Marion is such a wonderful bass player and just a wonderful person, too. And she's, she's got her own band, Straight Ahead, the all-female band, but she's been around here many years, and she's gotten to the point where, she's one of those people where you could just see her getting better and better all the time. And now she's not only one of my favorite bass players to work with, but she's got one of the best recording sounds. I've noticed that. I did a recent CD with somebody else that she played on, and her sound on the CD, and on my CD, the feel between Danny and Marion is that's my favorite part of the whole CD, I think.
Is that your favorite rhythm section? If you had to pick a rhythm section, would Danny and Marion be it, or?
Well, definitely one of my favorites.
Who else? Who else do you really like playing with in a rhythm section?
I used to work quite a bit with Gerald Cleaver when he was around town.
Oh yeah.
There's another.
He's great.
Oh yeah.
He kind of knows what you're going to play before you play it.
Yeah, and he plays so many styles so well, and of course, everybody's grabbed him up now, and he's playing with everybody all over the world. But he's one of those guys, and he did all that stuff with Lester Bowie, and he plays that genre of music so well that
hard to believe.
That real out edgy stuff.
Right.
And I interviewed him. He and his father, because his father,
Johnny Cleaver.
Johnny
Cleaver.
Sure,
a great drumming family.
I interviewed them for a magazine interview once, and one thing that Gerald said was that he couldn't play the kind of stuff he played, the out stuff like with Lester, and that if he didn't know all the ins and outs of just regular straight ahead playing. He says, and that's true with anybody. The foundation gives you the ability to understand what you need to do to go outside of it. If you don't have that, then you're just flailing around in the dark,
How about now on trumpet you've got the mighty Dwight?
Oh, Dwight Adams, yeah. Another great player. Another of so many protégés of Marcus Belgrave, I guess.
Right, sure.
And Dwight is now just one of the trumpet stars, I love playing with Dwight.
He's a hard worker, too. I remember back in the 90s, you'd always see him playing at Bert's at the jam sessions, and he'd be there, or you could go over to see Teddy Harris's band over at, Bomax.
Right. Bomax, yes.
He'd always be playing there. But
that's right.
It was funny because back at that time in the early 90s, he was very svelte and, like 20 years old or something, and always had the nice suits on, and now you see him and he's a man and not like he looked like a boy star at that time.
He's still the, trumpet players. The mystique of trumpet players is that they're the matinee idol type. Who was it? I can't recall the name. One of the great old time bass players. You'd know Jim. Foster? Somebody?
Pops Foster.
Pops Foster.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pops Foster used to describe different personality types of different players. And, of course, back then it was a little bit truer. Of course, there's stereotypes. But he used to say trumpet players were pimps and barbers.
Ray McKinney said the same thing. I wonder if he got that from he told me the same thing.
That
bass players were big, strong men who could, worked on the
stevedores.
Yeah, exactly.
I got all that from Ray McKinney.
Oh, yeah. Did you really?
Well, I interviewed Ray and Harold together for they did an archival thing at the Opera House, And so I wanted to do one with the two McKinney brothers. And, well, you know Ray and Harold.
Oh, yeah.
It turned into a real long thing because they'd just sit there arguing with each other about stuff. You know, it's on videotape. You know.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So you've got Dwight, you've got Marion. Now, what about on saxophone?
Saxophone, I've got Chris Kaercher playing tenor and soprano saxophones, who's a really fine player. And I had never met Chris before playing in Marion's band, and he was just brand new to me, and I liked his sound, and it was really nice doing the stuff we did with Marion. So, and I wanted to bring the whole band intact, so that was an introduction to Chris.
And on trombone,
valve trombone, actually.
Yes.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah,
Val.
is Al Duncan. I love Al. He's just such a ebullient, just happy, wonderful person, and a great trombone player. He studied with George Benson, the great tenor saxophone player. You know, he studied improvisation and music and everything with him. And he's a very good piano player. He goes on the road all the time with Earl Klugh.
I noticed, stylistically, it's all over the map. I mean, you almost dig back to everything besides going back to some of the 20s and 30s sound stuff, which is what makes it interesting too. It's like some bebop, some modern stuff. Makes me wonder where you're in. Like, was this album the result of many years of preparing an album in your head, or is this your mind, the way your mind works?
Boy, that's a good question. I think it was a result of, many years of just writing tunes, like all musicians. We'll write tunes from time to time, and I think I wrote all these tunes, never with the idea of recording them.
Sure.
Actually, I never really did have an idea of doing an album of them. It was actually, I was encouraged to do it by my wife, but I had quite a few tunes that I had written over a period of time, and so I just decided to do it. But yeah, they were all. I guess when I've I don't know how other people do it, approach composition. I mean, that's always a big mystery too, and it's one of those things that everybody tries to figure out and wonders about, But I guess I would always try and do something different. I mean, not do the same kind of tune. You want a different, sometimes you just feel in a certain mood to do a certain kind of piece, So a lot of them came out quite different. And then I wrote the one for my granddaughter. I wanted something, kind of tender, and it turned out to be a waltz, because most stuff that are either kids' tunes written for kids. I don't know if you ever notice this, but they're like 75-80% of them are waltzes. I've often wondered about that. I've got a theory about it, but
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the songs that we're going to be playing, and I think that the melody line on that's really, really pretty.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you did a great job.
You're listening to Detroit Jazz Stage. Maybe you could tell us about one interesting tune that Rodney and I were talking about earlier that is fairly obscure but very interesting, Sweet Betsy from Pike.
Ah, Sweet Betsy from Pike. Yeah, that's the only tune on there that's not an original. It is traditional, so I didn't have to pay any royalties. But that's not why I did it.
How old is it? Do you know any?
I know it's from the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows who wrote it or exactly when. And there's a lot of different sets of lyrics that I've Googled for it. But I loved the melody of this tune. And there's a lot of tunes like that where the melody is just so pristine and simple and beautiful. One of my favorite movies I was watching called The Gray Fox, which is the story of, it's fictionalized somewhat, but it's the story of the famous outlaw Bill Miner, who was a stagecoach robber, and then he robbed trains. After he got out of 20, 30 years in prison, he started robbing trains. There were no stagecoaches left. And
he upgraded.
Yeah. And it was played by that wonderful old actor Richard Farnsworth, who passed away. And it's just one of my favorite films. It's a beautiful film. The Chieftains, that great Irish group, did a lot of the music. And I think somebody else did a little bit of underscoring. But it was filmed in the Canadian Rockies, where all the stuff did take place, and it's just beautiful scenery. And anyway, there's one scene where Bill Miner's in the bathtub and one of those old ornate tubs, and he's happy and he's scrubbing and he's singing Sweet Betsy from Pike. And as he sings it, then it kind of melds into a little bit of an orchestral thing on it. They never finished the whole thing. And it just struck me when I was watching it. The melody was so beautiful that immediately I said, and I put this away for a long time. I didn't do it immediately, like sometimes you run to the piano, but it was always in my mind after that. I thought, I want to play this tune, and I got to do something and reharmonize it, and make it real nice. And so I eventually did, and I started playing it. So
the interesting thing about your reharmonization is, I didn't know the piece to begin with, but I was, as a jazz listener, I knew, that you had reharmed it, because clearly, every jazz musician is going to do that. But you, despite the fact that you did that, you left the character of the hymnal. Is that a hymnal piece?
It's not a hymn.
Or a hymn?
No.
No.
If you look at the words, it's far from a hymn. In fact, some of them get kind of
It's probably
a
little
raunchy.
Song. Yeah, it's probably a body song.
A little bit, yeah. It sound. I know what you mean, though, because of the simplicity of the melody and everything. It has that kind of sound to it.
That's what. So I was thinking that you kept it a certain amount of traditionalness on it, but
yeah, I wanted to keep it kind of like that. So it stayed that very triadic,
mm-hmm.
and not to voice any like real altered chords or anything on it. Right. I wanted to keep it kind of like that.
Yeah.
And then I did it in 2 keys. I have no idea why, but it felt like it needed to go to another key, and so I did it that way and kept going back and forth.
Right. Yeah. I think it's great. What's the form of the tune?
I think it's
Just an
A
section. That's what I kind of thought.
Yeah. I love those tunes that are just what's the form? A. Yeah.
Of course, your wife, Ursula Walker, is one of Detroit's finest song stylists, and you accompany her.
Oh, yes.
Is that how you met Ursula? Was through accompanying her? Did you
Yeah.
heard her? Or?
Yeah, well, it's interesting story. It's kind of a long story, I don't know, but...
We don't have any commercials.
Oh, no? Well, I guess, I knew who she was. Here's... the first time I ever saw her, although I'm sure I saw her on TV when she was a little girl, but I don't remember. The first time I ever saw her was in the 60s when Jack Brokenshaw's had a club. He had a place called Jack Brokenshaw's on near the Fisher Building. And it was a real well-known place at the time, and he was part of the Australian Jazz Quintet, and they served Australian food, cuisine there. And anyway, it was, I think the regular group, although it varied, was Jack on vibes, and Bess Bonnier on piano, Dan Jordan on bass, and that drummer, what was his name? Dick Reardon on drums. And then, of course, they had a lot of people playing all the time. But and Ursula on vocals. And this had to be in about 64, 65, 66, something like that. And I went to see her, and I have to say, I was just blown away because I had never heard anybody sing like that. What she did with not to get into a long description of it, but the way she, laid back and sped ahead. The way she phrased lyrics was unlike anybody else. And I think I met her that night, and I was very intimidated, and I don't think I said much, other than hello. She doesn't remember that at all, and totally doesn't remember that. But anyway, then we did one concert a couple of years later at Redford High School, which she remembers doing the concert, but she doesn't remember me playing piano. But at the time, she had been working with one of the great Detroit trios of all time, Terry Pollard on piano, Will Austin on bass, Bert Myrick on drums. Okay, we still work with Bert a lot. Not too much with Will, once in a while. Terry was one of my all-time favorite Detroit piano players. I mean, all the great bebop players that came out of Detroit, Tommy Flanagan, Barry Harris, I mean, you name them. And they were all great, and I loved them all, and I think Terry was maybe my personal favorite. She was, and of course, some people know she had an aneurysm and ended her career.
And we should just mention that she was in the house band at the Bluebird Inn and made those four sides with the Billy Mitchell Quintet for DG in around 1952.
Right.
And she played at the Hobby Bar for years, and she was with Terry Gibbs playing vibes and piano.
Oh,
I mean,
great
Terry,
great vibes player.
Yeah, she had so much music in her. A small woman, but I mean the amount of music that just flowed through her fingers was incredible.
She was amazing, and you'd hear her. I mean, she was a stone bebopper, and you'd hear the stuff she'd play, and it was like when you hear somebody play where every note, it couldn't be any other note. I mean, it could be the only possible line you could play in that spot. That's the way she played everything.
Playing solo piano, is this something you've done much of? And now, I mean, it's always, as a listener, the piano player, the left hand has to do a lot more maybe, and it takes a lot more energy. But how do you think that's true? What exactly are the challenges of playing solo as opposed to
I think
a group?
Solo is a real big challenge. It is for me, and I mean, I don't know about other players, although I have heard some say. I know I heard Bill Evans say in an interview once that it was a challenge, but it was, in a way, it was his favorite way of playing because he controlled everything. He didn't have to rely on anybody else. But then in another sense, you have to make everything happen. And, everybody has different skills. Some people are better at some things and some at others. I've done solo playing like in clubs, typical solo gigs. Most of them are background gigs and stuff. Definitely not many where it's a listening situation like I did the Carytown concert house, that solo series they had last year, and I think there's very few things like that I've done. I'm not totally comfortable, doing it like that. I enjoy doing it sometimes. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. It just depends on what's happening. But I'm not I don't play tenths with my left hand, so I don't really get into a stride thing like some solo players do. Not that I think you have to, Bill Evans did wonderful solo things, and he didn't do any of that.
No.
And the walking bass thing. I mean, I can do it, but I'm not a big fan of it. So you have to find ways to playing that are comfortable to you.
With you.
And it's something to try and figure out.
Speaking of figuring it out, would you be interested or willing to do something solo for us this evening?
Okay, sure.
So Rodney, you may have just twisted Buddy's arm into
Good,
getting him to play a couple of pieces for us.
Do you have something in mind?
Well, you know what? Why don't I play a little bit off of, since you mentioned Sweet Betsy, I'll play a little bit of that.
Oh, good.
And,
we can compare it between the radio or the radio.
The radio
you're
version.
recording.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll do that. Maybe I'll do a little bit of a tune that I wrote that's not on the CD called Bud's Daydream.
Great.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Buddy. We'll let you get up to your piano, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
All right.
Well, Buddy, we want to thank you so much for being on the show. This was an amazing chance to get to know you and to hear your amazing, incredible playing.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to be here in this setting.
Hi, I'm Rodney Reeves from JazzStage Productions. If you enjoy listening to Detroit JazzStage, we encourage you to leave your comments on iTunes. Doing so will help promote our show and keep us bringing quality shows to your iPod.
Detroit JazzStage is produced at Longview Sound in Metro Detroit for JazzStage Productions. Dean Sahutsky, executive producer. Mark Byerly is our sound engineer. I'm Jim Gallert.
And I'm Rodney Reeves.